Welcome to Wednesday Wanderings. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. A very chilly Cape Town today. It's also a day in which we continue to come to terms with the protests that very quickly turned into looting and burning of shops and trucks and buildings, and really seek to try and make any sense of what is happening in that space. It's a difficult one. And of course, it's a place in which we need to draw aside. We need to draw on our faith. We need to draw on our trust in God and in God's presence that continues to be part of who we are, and to continue to listen for that voice, which is God's call to us. In today's Eucharist readings, we find a reading from the Old Testament, Exodus 3, verses 1 to 12. The story of Moses walking by a burning bush and taking some time to notice it, to walk over, and ultimately to have a conversation with God. It strikes me that when things burn, perhaps God is wanting us to look in that direction. And as we look in that direction, to be curious, to ask questions. Questions that we might find very discomforting for ourselves, for our communities, for the way we do business as a nation, the way we relate one with another. Moses looks at this bush, and part of what intrigues him is that it's a very resilient bush. It's not burning, despite the flames emanating from it. And again, for me, there's a sign of hope in that. I think in my experience of South Africa over the last 50 plus years, a lot has happened looking back in history over more than 500 years. Every time this country has burnt in one form or another, we have always risen from the ashes. We've always found new hope to draw on. And there is a sense for me that Southern Africa is a bit like this bush. It's resilient. And I think we need to trust in that. But of course, as Moses goes over to the bush, he then enters into conversation with God. He first of all discovers it's holy ground, and he takes off his shoes. He then wants to know who he's talking to. And of course, it's this wonderful passage in which God says, "I will be who I will be." And that in itself is quite enigmatic, but also helpful at this time. Because what is life right now? And in the midst of our anxiety, perhaps even fear, our disillusion, our anger, all that goes with the multitude of feelings that these protests and resultant looting and burning bring up in us. It's to see and recognize that life will be what life will be. But to recognize too that we have some power over that. And part of the experience of Moses at the burning bush, of course, is that God then calls Moses, sends Moses. It's in this moment that Moses has a real sense of his purpose. And it took a burning bush, it took a resilient burning bush to bring Moses to that point. And my prayer is that somehow this present burning in our country may be something that awakens us anew and afresh to God's purpose for us, and for us to really reflect on what it is that God is calling us to. And of course, Scripture again helps us with that because it speaks deeply into relationship. And I think one of the deep issues that affects us as South Africans is a lack of trust, and that shows up in so many different forums. It is something that COVID-19, I think, really has highlighted, not only in South Africa, but globally, the rifts in our social fabric. And of course, as people of faith, those rifts concern us, and hopefully lead us into prayer, and prayer into action, and action back into prayer, and prayer back into action, that it may be a circle of reflection, taking time to hear God, taking time to see and consider our context, take that back to God, and begin to hear God calling us to a greater wholeness, a greater place of healing. And so whatever your emotions are right at the moment, hear that flames call us to attention. And as we focus that attention and we seek to discover God in that flame, in that fire, in that burning, what is God calling us to personally? How do our own attitudes, perceptions, ways of dealing with others need to change? And as we begin to live that change out in our individual lives, as we begin to allow that to impact on our family and friendship relationships, that will begin to flow into our broader society. There's a deep need for us to be more aware, to be more compassionate, more caring, and in the midst of it all, to really allow God to be that for us. So do offer God whatever your emotion is, but don't hold that emotion so tight that you do not hear God, or so tight that when you do hear God, you're unable to let it go and to move forward to do the work that God is calling you to, that God is calling us to, not just as people of faith, but as people of this country and of this nation.